Well, this weekend's summit is the biggest diplomatic meeting hosted by Tony Abbott since he was elected Prime Minister just over a year ago. Josh Frydenberg is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. He joins us live from Brisbane. Josh Frydenberg, very good morning to you.
Nice to be with you.
I would gather it was probably a long night last night, but can we just look at the headlines? And would you agree that the Prime Minister's agenda, which has been focusing obviously on global economic growth, has essentially been swamped by the issue of climate change?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. Look, the main issue at this G20 summit is growth, is employment, and particularly getting all nations to sign on to the Brisbane Action Plan, which is about getting more than 2% growth over and above what was to be expected in the world between now and 2018. You see, the IMF had downgraded international growth forecast to 3.3% this year and 3.8% next year, and that's below the 10-year average of 4.1%. So this growth target is really important to the world. Yes, issues like energy efficiency are going to be coming up at this summit, together with infrastructure investment, shadow banking, over-the-counter derivatives, strengthening the resilience of the financial system. All those issues are coming up, but essentially the G20 summit is focused on employment and growth.
What did you make of President Obama's speech at the Queensland University yesterday, where obviously part of the focus was very much on climate change, and pointedly he was looking at the implications that climate change would have on Australia?
Yeah, look, he talked about climate change, and we welcome that. And Australia is doing its bit on climate change. I mean, we've just passed through the Parliament a $2.5 billion commitment through direct action. And it has to be pointed out that the Chinese and American agreement is very welcome, but it's also into the future, because for the next 16 years, China will be increasing its emissions, but we welcome their commitments after 2030. And Australia and the United States actually have around the same commitments between now and 2020, about a 5% reduction on year 2000 levels. But it's important to understand about the speech yesterday, it was about much more than just climate change. I mean, when you read through that speech and you see Barack Obama talk about the values that Australia and America shares, I think he said we both are cut from the same cloth. When he talks about democracy, freedom, freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, when he talks about America's relationships with India, with China, with Singapore, Malaysia, it's a very important speech about the United States' commitment to our region. And when you think about the strategic importance of that speech, I think that's where the focus should be.
Well, I mean, that's
on
true.
How America is committed to the region.
Josh Frydenberg, what you say is true, yet did he not highlight that difference in policy between the United States and Australia on climate change, and perhaps make it uncomfortable for Tony Abbott at this meeting?
No, look, a number of countries have obviously said their piece on climate change. And as I said, Andrew, I mean, we're focused here in Australia on our direct action plan. And what you've just seen in the United States was a pretty emphatic victory to the Republicans in the United States Congress, so much so that the Republicans got the best result in the House there since 1928. So there's not going to be a carbon tax. There's not going to be a emissions trading scheme on a national scale in the United States. If Barack Obama is going to meet these targets, it's going to be through direct action type initiatives. So in fact, it says to Australians and to the world that what we are doing here in Australia through direct action can be scalable, is important, and are some of the same initiatives that are being pursued by our friends in the United States.
Mr Frydenberg, I'd like to take you to the meeting yesterday, the plenary meeting before the official event started. The opposition leader Bill Shorten has criticised Prime Minister Abbott for raising domestic issues at that event. What would you say to that criticism?
Not at all. I mean, in fact, the 1,000+ measures that have been submitted as part of the Brisbane Action Plan, which are going towards this 2% growth target, involve things like getting stability in the budget, getting deregulation in various sectors, including higher education. So it's absolutely consistent with what a Australia is doing, as well as what a number of other countries are doing to meet that 2% growth target, to talk about what we are doing here in Australia.
But is it
the other point is, Tony Abbott talked about a lot of other things other than just the Medicare co-payment and university fee deregulation.
Yes, he did, but Mr. Shorten specifically said it was, quote, weird and graceless to raise things like a GP co-payment in front of the presidents, German Prime Minister Angela Merkel and Xi Jinping.
Look, I feel sorry for Bill Shorten. He's not part of this summit. Wayne Swan would love to be here, so too Kevin Rudd, but it's the Abbott government that's pushing the agenda forward. If Bill Shorten wants to play partisan politics, let him do that, but we have a major agenda to push, which is showing where Australia can make a difference to world employment and growth.
Well, that is the case, but clearly the Prime Minister was exercising his frustration in front of those leaders when he said he couldn't get a lot of the policies that he was elected on through Parliament.
Look, that's just a statement of the fact, Andrew, but, we've still got our budget commitments. We've got to negotiate with the Senate, but we've also had a lot of success, and I think the Prime Minister made also reference to the fact that we've abolished the carbon tax, abolished the mining tax, succeeding in cutting red tape. So he talked about the positive side of the ledger and also a couple of areas where we'd like to see more movement.
Mr. Frydenberg, I understand some movement was made last night about discussions around trade. Will we be signing that much discussed free trade agreement with China tomorrow?
Yes, I'm very hopeful we will be, and Andrew Robb deserves a lot of the credit for that. Australia began free trade negotiations with China in 2005, the same year that New Zealand did. New Zealand concluded an FTA with China in 2008, and they've seen more than a doubling of their trade. We've now waited to 2014. It's taken longer than it should have, but we look like we're on the cusp of a really important agreement. And when you consider that China is Australia's major two-way trading partner, $150 billion worth of two-way trade, I think this is great news for the Australian agricultural sector, for the Australian services sector. I mean, services make up 70% of Australia's economy, but only 17% of Australia's exports. So there's a lot of scope, and I think the China-Australia FTA will be really good news.
I mean, you mentioned the winners there, certainly in agriculture and the services sector, but there will be losers, won't there?
Look, I don't think so. China wants greater access to invest in Australia, a bit like we gave to the Koreans and to the Japanese in those FTA agreements, but that's also good news. I mean, Australia's a country of 23 million people. China's a country of 1.2 billion people. They have a lot of money that wants to invest in safe countries like Australia. So I think that's really good. But, the main message out of this G20 summit when it comes to trade is that you can simultaneously pursue bilateral free trade agreements, regional free trade agreements, and we saw that discussion at APEC, but also the multilateral level, particularly the movement we're starting to see now through the WTO with the Trade Facilitation Agreement, which was pushed in Bali, which continues, if it can be settled, to deliver a really big dividend for the world. They reckon it's about $1 trillion worth of economic benefits and 20 million jobs that will flow from this WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, which cuts some of the barriers to trade behind the tariff walls. If that can be agreed to, that will be good news for Australia and for the world.
Josh Frydenberg, thanks very much for your time.
Great to be with you. Thank you.